welcome, welcome, and thank you for also making this time to be with us here today. Okay, so just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started, just to honor everyone's time. We want to get started on time. It's 4:30, so number one, again, really wanting to make sure that you take care of yourself and your bodies throughout this webinar, which means if right now I think everyone's got their camera turned off, that's totally fine if that feels like the most conducive to you in hearing, listening to the information that we're going to be sharing. Of course, we love seeing your faces too at any point in time. If you feel like turning on your video or even unmuting yourself and asking a question, you're welcome to. So throughout this seminar, just because of the time, we only have an hour, it's going to be unfortunately not as interactive as we would otherwise want this to be if we were doing this in person, of course. That said, at any moment in time, if you have a question, okay, that's coming up for you, please feel free to type them into the chat. The chat function is at the very bottom of your screen. Hopefully everyone can find it. You can just type in your question there. My colleague Mike, whom you also see on the screen here with me, is going to help us track those questions. And we're going to pause a couple times throughout the webinar to help you answer them. Okay. That said, if you rather not type it into the chat and just ask it in voice, you're also welcome to during the 2 times that we're going to pause for questions. Otherwise, we just wanted to invite you to temporarily mute yourselves, meaning you can turn your microphone off. We usually find that there's some feedback if there's multiple microphones on. If you can turn your microphone off on your end would be wonderful. Just gonna give folks a moment. Okay, and maybe folks are having trouble doing that, in which case perhaps Mike, if you see that their microphone's on, if you can just turn them off temporarily. Thank you. Okay, so with that said, let's get started. I'm just going to share our PowerPoint here. Okay, so make sure you can see it. I'm going to, okay, hopefully you can see the PowerPoint that I'm sharing right now. Feel free to type into the chat if there's any technical issues that you need our assistance on, okay? So welcome again, everybody. If you're just joining us, you haven't missed anything. So this is a webinar around on introductions to city cycling, and we're really honored that the City of Burnaby is a sponsor for this webinar. So thank you for making this possible. Before we get started, just wanting to take a moment to direct our attention to the fact that we can't talk about cycling, safety, or facilities without first recognizing and acknowledging the land on which all of this is happening and occurring. So through a lot of our various projects that Hub Cycling does, we're doing a lot of this work on the traditional, ancestral, and stolen lands and territories of many First Nations in BC locally. Specifically today, I'm signing on here to this learning and sharing opportunity with all of you from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded lands and territories of the Coast Salish peoples, nations, and this includes the Squamish, the Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples and nations. And so with this, we are also hoping that, you know, these acknowledgement, this is not going to be ringing on empty, meaning that there are lots of responsibilities with these acknowledgement that we're also recognizing that we have as organizations, as communities and individuals that are looking to make cycling better for everyone in this region, that there's a responsibilities there. And also with this acknowledgement, we're also extending this invitation hearing some typing sounds. I'm just gonna politely thank you. We're also extending this invitation to all of you to take a moment, whether or not it is right now as I'm speaking, or perhaps is throughout this entire webinar, thinking about your relationships with this land as you're cycling and learning about cycling on it, and the actions, perhaps, you know, more so than anything else, that little things that you can do to essentially committing to that responsibility that we all have to the lands and peoples in this region. Whether or not this is doing research that to get to know about more about the communities and peoples that came before you where you are, whether or not this is learning to pronounce the names and the peoples, indigenous folks that came before us correctly. For many of us, we may not have done that research to understand how to pronounce things correctly. Or is it to volunteer, donate your time and money and resources to Indigenous businesses, to support Indigenous movements, right? Artists. All of those things are important considerations for us to have. So with that said, welcome to the folks who are just joining us today, joining us now, rather. Just asking you to temporarily mute or turn your microphones off, rather, throughout the duration of this presentation, and turn them on when we're doing the question Q&A sessions. Okay. So very quickly about Hub Cycling, many of you know us probably through our celebration events like Bike to School and Bike to School Week or Bike to Work Week. And there are a couple of newer ones like Bike the Night and Bike to Shop Days, if you haven't heard of them. Our other pillars of this work that we do is around education and advocacy. I'm not going to read through the bullet points here for all of us, but if you want to get to know us a little bit more, you can log on to our website at bikehub.ca. Okay. Very quickly, just to introduce myself, my name is Donna, and my ancestral name you see on the screen here, Chen Tang Tang. I go by she, her pronouns. I've been with Hub since 2012 in various capacities. One of my favorite roles is actually around education and really being able to see how our work is transforming ways in which people can enjoy themselves on a bike, feeling safer, feeling more confident. So I'm hoping that the information we share today will also help create some more confidence and comfortability and hopefully joy that you get to have on your bikes after this webinar. So a quick little overview. Here is what we are going to cover today. You'll see that there are the couple of Q&A after safety scenarios. We're gonna make and take some time to answer your questions. And also at the very end, we're going to make some time, also maybe even to stick around for an extra few minutes, even if it is after 5:30, for those of you who have the time to stick with us to respond to your questions, okay? So with that said, let's get started. Just to get a sense of also who's here, and I'm sure there are lots of knowledge and skills that's also in this little online space today with all of us. So I'm going to do a very quick polling question here. Okay, so what is your experience? Just to get a sense of what kind of perhaps skills or knowledge that you have, again, in the space right now, or perhaps just where folks are at. And maybe there are some common grounds that we'll find. I'm just taking a moment, if you can, with your device to enter. It's a single choice question. Awesome. Okay, so just because of time, I'll end the poll here. So a bit of everything, actually. That's great. So for some of you, you've actually done this regularly. That's awesome to know. So once or twice a week, or tried it once or a few times, right? That's great. I even see folks who do this quite often, almost most days, and those who haven't done it. So I'm hoping that, again, some of the scenarios, some of these, considerations that we're going to cover today will support all of you, whether or not you've had some experiences or none. Okay, so I'm hoping that's the case. Now, again, I know this has maybe changed a little bit since COVID started, and this last year and a half of a very special circumstances. So I'm curious, for those of you especially who are riding or who has ridden a few times, right, in your life or regularly, what are some of the reasons that you want to learn more about cycling in the city? So just taking a bit of time, take your time, read through the options. And while you're taking your time to do this, me and Mike will just have a little conversation. So Mike, I've recognized after COVID, especially, I'm riding my bike to, instead of getting to work, which is what I used to use my bike the most for, I'm using my bike to mostly de-stress, and just like, especially in the evening times when the streets are quiet, I like to go out and do my little ride just to clear my head. What about yourself?
Yeah, honestly, before I was going to the grocery store, going to work, but now I'm just getting away from home. I love my family, don't get me wrong, but when I get on that bike, I'm reminded of how much I enjoy it. I forget how much
Yeah.
it's my therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agreed. Um, I'm going to just give folks another moment in case you want to participate. Yeah, I'm seeing some resonance in what folks are putting in here. So I'll just show the results here, sharing the results with you here. So you can see how amazing. So many people are using it for exercise.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that me too. And discovering, another big one is discovering new places and sightseeing. Absolutely. It's one of the more reliable, or probably for many people a safer option than maybe taking transit, right? Public transportations, depending on, the stage of COVID that we'd gone through. Yeah, definitely seeing for fun, socializing, so where there's been limited options in terms of what we can do for fun. Absolutely. So thank you for that. So again, with all of these options, we're also recognizing, I mean, it doesn't matter what you're using your bikes for, safety is still a pretty prominent, I would say, reason or a concern or consideration people take when they're planning their routes and when they're doing their rides. So hopefully today we'll cover quite a bit of those safety scenarios and considerations for you to keep in mind. Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty. We're going to start our webinars with, and for some of you this may be familiar, that's great, with a safety ABC check that you should always do every time before you jump on your bike. There is a more in-depth, sort of comprehensive bike mechanic course that you can take. It's another webinar that Hub offers in case you're more interested in this, right, to do it yourself. But basics are, every time before you take your bikes out, check your A, B, and C's. And you can see what these letters stand for on the screen here. When you check for air, typically, I know that people use their fingers to pinch their tires, should be pretty firm, like a watermelon, as we tell kids, right? And there's also, just so that you know, there is a number or range for getting to know the air pressure that your bike needs. There is a minimum and a maximum often for adult bikes. So get to know that range, that number, before you pump air into your tires, just to make sure that you're going over the minimum, but stay under the maximum. Okay. In terms of brakes, always check your brakes one at a time. Most bikes that you're taking out onto the streets have, two brakes. I mean, there are trick bikes that only has one, but we recommend if we're doing city cycling, have both front and back brakes. Make sure you know which one is which. Left hand, for the most part, most bikes, the left hand brake is for the front wheel, the right hand brake is for the back wheel. Test it one at a time and make sure that each one of your wheels is stopping. Okay. In terms of chain and cables, chain, number one, take a look at whether or not it's the right color. When we say the right color, we mean it shouldn't be orange, meaning rusty, right? Or make sure that, especially if it's a chain that's been, on your bike for a long time and you haven't been taking care of it, it's probably a good idea to even take it to a shop if it's really rusty, or it falls off all of the time when you're riding. It might be time to swap that out completely for a new one. Okay. With chain, you want to do a little quick test to either use your hand or maybe one of your feet to pedal your pedals backwards. And if it's a pretty smooth sound with the chain and nothing, your chain's not falling off, it's not making any kind of strange noises, usually means that your chain is in good working condition. Okay. Cables, basics with bike mechanics, all you're checking is to make sure cables are in the right place, that they are tucked in nicely and there's nothing fraying. Okay, so again, making sure they're, if it's rusty, for example, you're really seeing a number of places that are not quite the right color, you want to take it to a shop to get them to change your cables up. Otherwise, the very last thing I would do is to do a quick drop test, meaning that you'll lift your bike up from the ground, maybe a couple inches, and do a gentle little drop. And what you're listening for, again, are sounds that are coming from your bike. And this drop test is really testing whether or not all of those screws and bolts and quick releases are secured nicely and safely. So if you hear something clunking, it probably means you have to tighten something. Okay. So otherwise, we're going to move on from the basics of the ABCs. Okay. So this next part, again, the only thing that we're really trying to emphasize here is that there's not one way to dress or to carry things on your bike that is the correct way. There are multiple ways that you can do this, depending on your body, depending on what you know is comfortable for you, right? So the key message here also is that, yes, we know there are lots of different gears, right? Whether or not it's what you can wear or what you can carry out there in the world. Just because they're there doesn't mean you need to buy it or you need to buy everything. We encourage and invite you to think about a couple of key pieces that are going to make your ride really comfortable. Right? That's going to make you feel more comfortable and confident on your bike. So for example, for me, I know that that back rack on my bike, especially if it's a for commuting purposes, I want to make sure I'm carrying stuff on the back rack with panniers or bike bags rather than a backpack on myself, because I know I'm not going to enjoy the ride as much when I do that. Same thing if you're doing, colder weather riding, having gloves or maybe some waterproof gear is going to be probably going to make a huge difference, right? So we're hoping to make this a little bit more interactive rather than just me talking. You can type into the chat. Again, for different people, you may have different preferences, right, for gears or what you might prioritize. So especially if you have, either you tried riding a few times or you ride regularly, I invite you to just type into the chat so that we can make this a conversation of your favorite pieces of gear that you feel might be beneficial or important for other people to get or to invest in as well. Okay, so just noting that. And while you do that, maybe Mike, do you have any kind of favorite gears or pieces that you feel is worth investing in for folks?
You know what I love? I love something that holds my smartphone handlebars because I'm constantly using Google Maps and it's just been super handy for me.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, instead of bringing, like grabbing it in and out of your pocket, right? For those of you who actually, yeah, feel comfortable doing that, it's not the safest either, right? So having that mounted, yeah, on your bike is great. I see Jason here say, yeah, a bell is essentially, in fact, for some municipalities, Vancouver specifically, I think a bell is actually part of the bylaw. You do have to have a bell on your bike. For other municipalities, it's different. For me, definitely lights is a big one. I think we might even have a slide later on that. Lights meaning I'm not going to rely on my clothing because, again, even if I wear bright colors or reflectors, it means that a light has to shine on me, right, for them to see that I'm present. So I rather invest in not only just the lights that are on my bikes, but I usually grab a couple of spare lights just in case batteries run out for my lights. I love lights that light your bikes up on the side. So spoke lights or valve lights are some of my favorites in the darker days of the year. So feel free, again, to type it into the chat, anything else that you recommend throughout this webinar. Okay, so now on the topic of lights, just a quick little research so that you know, there's been research that's done around running lights during the daytime. And it found that it lowers risk of collision by 47%. So that's a pretty big percentage. And something for you to consider also, especially on the grayer, maybe foggier days of the year, to make sure you have even lights on during the daytime. Okay, so now moving into some of the safety scenarios. As I mentioned, we're gonna give you some considerations around safety throughout, that's kind of the bulk of this webinar. We just wanted to remind all of us now, there in the Motor Vehicle Act of BC, there is a specific section on the rights and responsibilities of folks on bikes. And in there, pretty much it says that we have the same responsibilities, as well as we're allowed the same rights, meaning that we are allowed to do the same things as a car driver. Okay, so keep this in mind as I move through some of these safety scenarios. One more thing before we move into the safety scenarios, keep these 4 basic needs in mind. And this is what we summed up based off of, again, experiences, as well as thinking about that intersection between law and safety. Okay, so the first need you want to be keeping in mind is the need to be able to move, meaning how much space do you have to maneuver, especially given if there is a situation where maybe there's an emergency stop that you have to make. Do you have enough space to maneuver? Okay. Second need is a need to be seen. So often people interpret this as, lights, of course, do I have lights on my bike, on myself, right? Bright, colorful clothing. We also encourage you to interpret this need as, am I and my bike in a spot that is seen by all road users? Meaning you want to make sure that you're staying out of people's blind spots, right? Especially motor vehicle drivers. The third need is the need to be clear. By clear, we mean clear communication. There are lots of different ways you can communicate with other road users. A few things comes to mind. One is hand signals, hoping that everyone is familiar with this. So if you're turning left, your left arm out perpendicular to your body, this is signaling to turn left. Turning right, same arm, except that you are bending your elbow upwards, right? A 90-degree angle, that's turning right. And stop, you reverse that turning right hand signal, and it's kind of like a little reversed version of that, right? This is stop, okay? Your right arm, if you so choose to, also can signal to turn right, which is perpendicular to your body, pointing to the right. This is actually a hand signal we teach a lot of children to do, because we simply tell them you point to the direction that you're turning. There's kind of pros and cons to both of these hand signals for turning right, right? And if we have time, we'll talk about that, but know that there are 4 hand signals. Other ways to communicate. Earlier, I think somebody mentioned the bell. Yes, absolutely. Having a bell on your bike can communicate to folks in front of you, on your side, that you're about to do something. Don't forget your voice. Your voice is very powerful. So I often, even with a bell, I say on your left as I'm passing somebody. Also, body language and eye contact, right? As a pedestrian, we know that is a pretty powerful way of communicating to other folks, as a cyclist as well. And there's a scenario later on where I'm going to share with you some body language considerations for communicating. Last but not least, the 4th need is to do what is expected. This may sound very simple: riding in a straight line, stopping at stop signs, stopping at red lights. And we also know that in reality, not everybody does that, right? So know that there's liabilities, of course, around that, but the more that you do what is expected, the safer you might be, okay? So you'll see now from now on a series of pictures. Pictures is worth 1,000 words. So this very first picture is a way to communicate safe distances. Hopefully this is really related to that very first need of the need to be able to move. Safe distances currently, there's some also updating that we're really trying to do some advocating of what is the safe distance that motor vehicles should leave between a bicycle and themselves. Right now it's at 1 meters. Okay, 1 meters is about an arm and a half for my arm. You want to leave 1 meter between yourself and a moving vehicle, and about 1 meter between yourself and the curb or a parked car. So this means you can avoid debris, right? Those crates that's on the ground, depending on if it's raining, of course, slippery surfaces, sometimes piles of leaves, right, by the curb. The reason why you want to leave 1 meter between yourself and a parked car is to avoid that door zone. 1 in 7 of all collisions happen in that door zone, and it can be avoided very easily. Okay. So when you don't have this distance, I know there are many streets across the region that are much more narrower to fit you with these safe distances and a moving vehicle. When you do not have those safe distances, when you perceive that there is no such safe distances around, you have the right as a cyclist to take the lane. So when we say taking the lane, we mean being in the middle of the lane. You'll see that on the top half of this picture here, that is taking the lane. You're actually literally occupying that lane as a motor vehicle would. You do not need to see the sign on the right, may use full lane, to know you have this right, okay? This is fairly new to a lot of people, and I know also that it can be very scary to do, may feel pretty intimidating to do initially, because you've got this bigger, you're more vulnerable, of course, exposed, and there's this bigger motor vehicle behind you. It may sometimes feel a bit aggressive, depending on, of course, if they're having a bad day, if they're following behind you really closely. So we recommend when you're trying this out, do it with some people first and do it on quieter streets. Okay, just to practice that confidence of taking the lane. Also, know that you always have the option to signal to stop. Okay, if you feel like it's getting too aggressive, perhaps the driver behind you, to stop, come to a stop in a safe enough place that you perceive is safe enough for you, and your bike, and move your bike onto the sidewalk and walk that block, right? You can always use that superpower to turn yourself into a pedestrian at any point in time. So take the lane is a huge, hopefully, resource for you, depending on your level of comfort with cycling, and you can work up to that. And this is what a lot of our in-person courses at Hub that we do, is taking small groups out to practice this. So down the road, when we start doing that again, we'll definitely keep you posted. Now, the next slide here is around about bike lanes. Okay, so this is really the simple message here is that just because there is a painted bike lane, for example, do not assume that anywhere in that bike lane is safe for you to ride. So in this picture specifically, you see that if this person on the bike were to be in the center or slightly to the right of that bike lane, that car door might get them. Right. So again, there's of course gaps and imperfections in infrastructure. So pay attention to that and make your own informed decisions. Next one is a fun one. This is around four-way stop intersections. Okay, so a quick reminder for us for rules of the road at four-way stops. Number one, pedestrians always has a right-of-way. Okay, and then the vehicle that gets there first always has the right-of-way. So doesn't matter if it is a bike or if it is a motorcycle or if it is a car. Okay. And if you got there together with somebody, the person on the right always has the right-of-way. So in this case, if you see the cyclist at the very bottom of the image and the car adjacent to them, if they got there at the same time, the car would have the right-of-way only because the car is on the right side, not because it is bigger. Okay. Now, last one, if you are moving toward one another, meaning you're going toward one another at this four-way intersection, the person going straight has the right-of-way, the person turning left needs to wait, okay, to turn. So a reminder for all of you, in case it is, it's new information for anybody. Now at four-way intersections, we recommend, unless there is a separated bike infrastructure or bike lane, for example, or sometimes, yes, there may be a painted bike lane. Unless that is the case, you should always take the lane. Okay, so these two cyclists you see in the image are doing a great job at being bang on in the middle of that lane. And the reason here is because of a few considerations. Remember those four basic needs. Okay, so this is related to the need to move and the need to be seen. So the need to move, meaning if you are tucking yourself between a motor vehicle and the curb, usually at these four-way intersections, the lane is pretty narrow. Okay, and if that motor vehicle decides last second to make a right turn without you seeing that they were signaling to turn right, you are stuck between that right turning vehicle that may be hugging the curb and the curb. Right? So make sure you have enough space to move, and taking the lane is a really good way to do that. Second is around visibility. So this means you are definitely going to be visible if you take the lane either behind or in front of a car, not when you're beside it, because an adjacent vehicle, especially say a vehicle that is on the left-hand side adjacent to you, right, may only see that big vehicle that is, that you're hiding up pretty much beside, right, or behind from their perspective. So especially if they're distracted on their phones or maybe moving down to pick something up, they're just going to expect that motor vehicle to get past them before they go. And they might step on that gas while you're still in the middle of the intersection, because bicycles usually takes a little bit longer than a car to get started, right? So again, making sure you're visible, you're able to move, those are big considerations. Now, this is where body language and eye contact might come in handy. Sometimes we also know that especially if I'm riding with kids, which we do often in especially hubs education programs, there are drivers who are very courteous, right? They really want to make sure that we're safe. So even though it is their right of way to go, they decide to make this what we call the courtesy stop. They stop at the four-way intersection, even though it's their right of way to go, and they try to wave me and my kiddos over, please go, right? And while that is a really nice and kind consideration, it actually confuses a lot of people, right? And it also puts the onus or the liability on me and the kids, because if we decide to go just because they told us to, and there is a collision, unfortunately somebody didn't see us, that liability is on us. So what we often recommend is if there's a driver that's making a courtesy stop and trying to wave you through, the way that you can communicate that you're not going to listen to them and you're just going to stand your ground and just to keep both them and you safe is I sometimes just shake my head, right? So that's hopefully pretty clear in communicating. I'm not going to go. No. Sometimes I take a hand off my handlebars. I either look away, right? Removing of the eye contact, or I look away, I take a sip of my water so they know, okay, this person's not paying attention to what I'm telling them, and they usually go right away. Or sometimes if I'm able to take both of my hands off, I do this. Hopefully this may or may not be clear to other people what you're trying to communicate, but for some people, they understand, okay, this person's not going, right? And maybe that's in combination with a head shake. So all of these things, straightforward, but oftentimes we don't think of them, right, when we're in that situation. So we just wanted to share that as considerations for you next time you're navigating four-way stops. Next up is around traffic circles. So traffic circles are the little small circles that you see in residential neighborhoods, usually designed to slow down traffic and to calm traffic. Even though in reality, we also know that it may or may not be able to accomplish that sometimes, right? So especially for you and your loved ones when you're riding, consider some of the safety factors at traffic circles, okay? So we recommend when you're approaching a traffic circle, slow down. Okay, so there are lots of different hills depending on the municipalities that you're in. Sometimes a traffic circle is situated right on a hill. And there are times when I see people not slowing down at all and just literally flying down that hill through the traffic circle. Lots of risks there, meaning that you're really not keeping in mind also whether or not you're seen by other people or if you're able to even make time to see who else is coming toward the traffic circle. So slow down is number one. We recommend you do a hand signal before you arrive at the traffic circle. And this hand signal usually is for the people behind you, right? So whether or not you're turning left or turning right, do that hand signal before you enter the traffic circle, especially if you're turning left at the traffic circle. I hope most of you, this is old information for you, you're keeping to the right of the traffic circle to turn left, right? Especially if you're turning left, you're gonna spend quite a bit of time in that traffic circle. So if skills allow, we recommend that you do another hand signal, left turning hand signal, when you're in the traffic circle just before you turn. And that really helps the people that are coming from either directions, right? Or also that folks who are maybe coming towards you but didn't see you signal that first time. Okay. Otherwise, the rules of the road for traffic circles are similar to the four-way stop. Right? And I know that in reality, again, it's really making sure you're paying attention. Just because you're obeying rules of the road doesn't mean other folks may be obeying the rules of the road. So that slowing down before you enter the traffic circle also hopefully creates a little buffer for you to move, especially in case that there is another either driver or cyclist who is not keeping to the right to turn at the traffic circle. So all of those things, slowing down can really help resolve or help support. There are a couple scenarios here of traffic light controlled intersections. Okay, so now in this image, you'll see that there are two cyclists. One is moving, rather traveling straight through the intersection. Okay, that's not three cyclists, that's just one. Okay, and one is signaling to turn right at the top right corner there. Okay, so first of all, I'm gonna see, we're not doing, we're on time, but we don't have too much time. So I'm going to just talk us through this. If I were the cyclist traveling straight through, what I would do is take the lane. Okay, so this image, this cyclist, I would actually do something different than them. I would take the lane because a motor vehicle behind me might perceive, oh, there's enough room on their left to pass them or to overtake them. Then you're stuck between a straight through vehicle traveling straight through and a right turning vehicle that's signaling you turn right, but who knows, last minute they may decide, oh, I'm actually going straight. Then you're stuck, right? A note that all rules of the road apply to cars and bikes equally, meaning that if you're going straight through, you need to be in the straight through lane rather than the right turning lane, even though it feels a little weird not to be on the, the lane that is the closest to say the sidewalk. Okay, so the positioning of the cyclist is good. Now, the cyclist who is signaling to turn right, that's a beautiful position for them to be. So again, you might now remember these needs, right? So the cyclist is definitely able to be seen. That's great. Need to be able to move, not stuck between a right turning vehicle and the curb. That's awesome. So all of these things are just little reminders for us to always think about what needs are you meeting here of the 4 main needs. This next one is making a left turn on your bike. There are a lot of different ways, specifically pictured here, 2 ways that you can do that. Okay, when you're navigating a left turn, if you're skilled, if you feel really confident on your bike, you can definitely do a vehicular left turn as pictured here in the dotted lines with the cyclists wearing the yellow, and you can see that they are looking back, signaling, doing shoulder checking. That's another powerful body language, right? Especially when you're looking back, making eye contact with car drivers. Usually you'll notice that they're starting to slow down a little bit because they can see that you're about to do something. Okay, there is not a limited amount of shoulder check that will guarantee you will, do the lane change safely. I'd say as many shoulder checks as possibly you feel is safe for you. Okay, and then hand signaling to move into the left turning lane. Then when it is safe to do so, whether or not it's a green and there's no oncoming traffic, or when the light is yellow, you can safely turn left into the innermost left lane. That is the only legal way to go, okay, before you shoulder check and signal to move to the right lane. Okay. If you feel this is nowhere near where I feel safe, right, to do or comfortable to do, you can always do the pedestrian left turn, which means you're going to ride across that intersection. And then depending on the infrastructure there, if there's a painted or separated bike lane, get in there, that's awesome. If not, you can either trigger the light, you can walk or ride across when the light turns green. Okay, so your superpower as a pedestrian can always be activated whenever it isn't safe for you to navigate the intersections. A couple more slides before I take a pause. Bike-specific lights, lanes, and boxes. These are slightly probably different for different municipalities. These images are, we understand it's quite Vancouver-centric. So if you have questions about bike-specific infrastructure in your municipality that's not pictured here, please do type it into the chat, or maybe later on when we pause, you can ask them in voice. So bike lights, just know that they may not always sync with traffic lights for cars. Okay, so pay attention to those bike lights when they come on. Don't assume that it syncs with the traffic lights. Bike lanes. I know that for most municipalities now, bike lanes are often painted green. Just to highlight that it is a bike lane, and it also is more visible for other road users. So that's good news. Okay. Bike lanes, sometimes also you'll find at the bottom image here, you can see this is a picture of Union Adirondack route. There are roads that are now designed so that there are vehicles actually parked on the left side of the bike lane. So in this case, really making sure that you're actually keeping an eye out for pedestrians that may be crossing this bicycle lane. And of course, when we're pedestrians, we also should pay attention to the fact that, oh, right, let's wait before we cross this bike lane because there may be bikes coming, okay? So paying attention, any kind of road user that you may be at a given moment on a given day. Last but not least, with bike boxes, these are boxes that are usually at intersections connected to either a separated or a painted bike lane. And when you see a bike box, it's a signal that if you're on a bike, you can park yourself in that bike box. So when the light turns green, you have the right to go first. Okay, so it's a priority to go first kind of infrastructure for bikes. And again, depending on that intersection, if you are able to turn left, go straight, or turn right, you want to place your bike in the location that is the easiest for you to start on when the light turns green. So hence the top right image there, right, where you should be positioning your bike. Bike boxes can allow sometimes up to 7 or 8 bikes kind of even lined up together. So again, depending on the size of the bike box, you can actually be abreast, meaning side by side with a cyclist, and wait for the light to turn. The bottom image here is an image that really just explains this is a Copenhagen turn. What we mean by that is that sometimes it is connected to another bike lane, perhaps on the left side, adjacent on the left side here. And so in order to turn left, that bike lane, you can't just turn from the right lane, right, or a separated bike lane. You can't do a vehicular left turn on that intersection. So which means that if you're a cyclist, you have to turn right and reposition your bike in that bike box to turn left. That's all it means. Okay. All right, I promise I'm going to pause very soon. Buses and large vehicles. So simply put, if you don't have to be on a street with buses and large vehicles, don't, right? So this is where route planning, looking at Google Maps, looking at print maps will come in handy for you, okay? And if you have to be on buses and large vehicles streets for like a couple blocks, stay behind it. We just want to make sure that you're not doing the leapfrogging, meaning you're trying to pass them when they're loading or unloading, and then they pass you once they get started. Every time you do that, there's a risk that you may be in their blind spots, right? You have to change a lane as well. All of those type of things you may simply save by sitting for 15, 20 seconds behind a large vehicle. Okay, so we'll keep that in mind. Okay. Phew. Okay, I did say I promise I'm going to stop. So let's pause here for a few minutes here, just in case there's any questions. And feel free to also just unmute yourself and ask them too. Guessing maybe folks are either typing. And if you feel like, I don't have any question right now, but if there's a question that comes up after the webinar, you can also email us directly about them, okay? Okay, so just for the sake of time, if you're still typing in a question in the chat, great, we're gonna respond to that at the end. Otherwise, I'm gonna move on and just cover the rest of the content, okay? Okay, so the next little bit, we're just going to talk about multimodal transportation for all of you. As you all know, there are lots of different ways you can combine cycling with other modes of public transportation. And now that we're at stage 3, hopefully this may feel more accessible to some of us. Okay, so I'm not going to read through this. All of this information is available on TransLink's website. Know that, of course, during rush hour, westbound and eastbound on Expo and Millennium lines, that there are a couple hours, each way that your bike is not allowed on these lines. But otherwise, it's pretty accessible for combining public transit with your bike. Specifically, with bus bike racks, if you haven't done this before, no sweat, okay? There are a couple of really great support resources that you can use to try this out. So number one, I recommend you Google the how-to video. TransLink has a couple videos, I believe, online. Just Google bus bike rack, okay? And watch that video so it gives you a sense of, oh, okay, this is how you do it, okay? Now, I always like learning by doing. So good news is that there are 5 practice demo stations now in the region. There are a couple in sorry, there should be a bullet point form in front of City Hall Plaza. So Main Street and City Hall are in the city of Vancouver. There's a, oh, weird. Okay, there's only 4 here pictured. That's strange. There's Main Street and City Hall, I believe in Vancouver, actually it can be on Broadway around that area in City Hall, or outside of City Hall rather, there is a bike rack. City of North Vancouver, City Hall Plaza also has a rack. And also the Production Way University and Moody Center outside of the SkyTrain stations also has a demo station. Okay, so look for them, especially if you live close by to any of these demo stations. If you don't, that's also no worries. You can simply roll your bike over to a bus depot, for example, that's close to you. When a bus driver is waiting for their shift or maybe just taking a break, you can ask them nicely if you can try this out. They are usually pretty great about it because they want you to do it right when you're doing it in real time. So you can just try it out that way. Okay. Route planning. Hopefully some of you may recognize this map. This is a screenshot of the Burnaby route planning, or rather Burnaby bike map. For each municipality, there is a bike map that is available. For the most part, you can actually access a PDF version of them on TransLink's website if you just Google it. Okay. Now, I like paper maps a lot because they also create, or they also have legends, meaning descriptions on the side on that paper map that tells you really important information about what you need to remember as a cyclist, rules of the road and such. Specifically, even for the Vancouver map, I'm just going to show you this very quickly. There is a little chart, whoops, right here. That also tells you, I'm sorry if this is like not mirrored on your end, it's called a micro mobility chart that tells you what is allowed on specific roads, which is really helpful, I find. So, you know, especially if you have an e-bike, you're not allowed, you're allowed on major roads, local roads, protected bike lanes or pathways, except for the seawall, for example, right? So I wouldn't know that if I didn't take a look at this map and the information that's here. So pay attention to those things as well. Google Maps, I know that a lot of you use it. That's awesome. Just know that there are certainly just a little bit of limitations there, meaning that they're not updated regularly. So just keep in mind there may be some detours that's not necessarily, you know, information-wise, it's not available on Google Maps. And I also find when I plan my route on Google Maps, patterns-wise, typically Google Maps throws me out and plans these routes that land on arterial streets rather than residential and bike routes. So that is one of the reasons why I like to use Google Maps with paper maps. One of the other really great resources is this brand new, came out in January of this year, Metro Vancouver cycling map, which is a regional map. It unfolds into a huge map. And this really helps, especially if you are planning to ride, say, from Burnaby to Coquitlam, or from Coquitlam to Vancouver, you know, across municipalities. And it really helps to route plan what are some of the best routes for connecting, right, different municipalities. So this is a really good resource. Again, it's downloadable on TransLink. You can also pick one up at your local bike shop, or I believe City Hall sometimes might also carry them. Okay, otherwise, if you have any other route planning apps or tools that you use, please pop them into the chat. I'm sure that everybody can appreciate and also can use that information as well. There are lots, and we specifically have a route planning webinar workshop as well, in case that's also something that you're interested in down the road. You can attend that one. Okay, so I'm very mindful of time. So while you're typing in your questions, okay, or maybe just getting ready to compose your questions, I'm just going to move through some of the resources at your disposal. Okay. Again, there's going to be a follow-up email that's sent to you with more resources. okay, and more links, including some of the things we talked about today, including maps and such. So keep an eye out for that. But on the Hub website now, there are 2 online courses that are available to you and your family and your loved ones. One is geared more towards youth, children 9 to 12, but that said, doesn't mean that it's not going to be useful information for adults. Learn to Ride Online is the course that we specifically designed for school-aged learners, and Streetwise Cycling is more geared towards adults, so you can sign up for either one of those with your family, your loved ones, and hopefully there will be some little review maybe of some of the information we even went through today, but if you want it in written form, right, visually, you can always sign on to these 2 courses. Otherwise, I don't know how many of you are currently Hub memberships or members rather. Because we're a not-for-profit organization that is membership-based, members really amplify our voices in helping to make cycling better in Metro Vancouver. So with an affordable membership rate, not only will you be getting a lot of perks, including free driving minutes with car sharing companies and bike share, Mobi, and such, and a lot of different discounts with bike shops across the region, you're really also giving us a voice. We always want to make sure that we're getting in members' opinions and ideas when we're working with municipalities and the province as well. You're really helping us to amplify the voices as well. Okay, so that's all on our Hub website as well. As I mentioned, you're going to receive a follow-up email. In there, there's also a feedback survey. So if you have an extra maybe minute or so, please join us, okay? Because, or rather, please fill it out and send it back to us. It will really help us to make webinars and education workshops like this better in the future, okay? So there's still quite a few minutes, 3 minutes to be precise. I'm just going to stop this share and questions. Even if it's not related to what we talked about, if you just have a question about your bike, for example, we're happy to help answer them. Great, thank you. I'm hoping that the information that we shared is helpful to all of you, wherever kind of your comfort level, confidence level is with cycling. And know that there are lots of other resources, of course, that Hub is not just webinars, but other resources online by checking out Hub's website. Good question. I would have to check our schedule, but I believe if you go to the webinar Hub website rather and look on the upcoming webinars, the information should be there. Absolutely. Okay, so I see a question about type of bike locks. Yes, good question. So there are a couple. This is a 3-part question. Number one, in terms of brands wise, I would recommend Kryptonite and or Abus. Mike, would you mind typing that into the chat? I know that's not maybe accessible for everyone to know. In terms of bike locks, for most of the bike locks, there will be kind of a number, in terms of how secure is this lock, right? Talk to your bike shop representative. Usually they will give you some good recommendations. With bike locks, I think that the key piece here is that if bike lock can guarantee usually maybe I would say 80 to 85% of security in terms of your bike not being taken, right? Otherwise, I think it's really important that you pay attention to, number one, where you lock your bike, okay? Depending on, again, if it's a really expensive bike, you might want to invest a little bit more on that bike lock. We recommend against Cable locks, absolutely, it's very easy to cut through, very easy to take. You can combine a cable lock with a double-ended lock or one of these lock brands that we're recommending, meaning you can loop your back wheel or your front wheel in, and you always want to lock the frame and one of the wheels together. Okay, so you never want to lock only your front wheel or your back wheel or just the frame. You want to lock two of those things together. Okay, otherwise, I would say 529, Project 529 is a really good app to get and to register your bike's serial number on. If you don't know what that is, do a quick little Google search. Your serial number is usually located at your bottom bracket. You know, again, if you bought a bike from a bike store, usually they have it on record on your receipt. You can also give them a quick call. When you register your serial number, if there were to be an instance where a bike is taken, there's going to be a community that will be at your back to try to track that bike back. And when, if it is recovered, they will be able to reconnect, or rather they would be able to return that bike to you without any challenges or hassle. Okay, so but you do need to register your serial number of your bike with Project 529. Otherwise, I'm hoping that answered your question. If there's anything else about locks, let me know. Okay, so just noticing the time here, and I think that there might be another online remote webinar that's happening or meeting that's happening soon on this account. So if there's no other questions, thank you so much to everybody for making this time to join us. If you have any other questions after the webinar, you can email us directly at the email address where you are going to receive this follow-up email. Okay, and we're going to be happy to answer them for you. So thank you so much. Take good care, and we hope to see you on the bike lanes. Take good care.